My name is Serafina, and for 8 years, my family excluded me from every holiday, birthday, and celebration. They said I was too dramatic, too sensitive. Last month, I discovered the real reason through a accidentally forwarded email chain. My inheritance from grandmother's estate had been secretly divided among my siblings while I received nothing. They thought I would never find out. But here's the thing about underestimating the black sheep of the family. We learn to bite back harder than anyone expects. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I want to know where you're watching from today. Are you Team Justice or Team Forgiveness? Hit that like button if you believe karma always comes around, and don't forget to subscribe because trust me, this story has more twists than a coastal highway. You're going to want to see how this plays out. 8 months ago, I was living in my cramped studio apartment in downtown Portland, working 60-hour weeks as a financial analyst. My relationship with my family had been strained since college, but I always assumed it was just typical sibling rivalry mixed with personality differences. My older brother Marcus was the golden child, Harvard MBA successful tech startup. My sister Delphine was the family princess, married young to a doctor, three perfect children. Then there was me, the one who chose state school, who worked in a cubicle, who never seemed to measure up to their standards. The exclusion started gradually. First, I stopped receiving invitations to Marcus's fancy dinner parties. Then Delphine began having family gatherings on weekends when she knew I had to work. Holiday plans were made in group chats that somehow never included my number. When I asked about Thanksgiving, I was told they assumed I was too busy. Christmas became a similar story. My parents, Eleanor and Richard Blackwood, seemed to go along with whatever my siblings decided. The breaking point came during my father's 60th birthday celebration. I found out about the surprise party through a social media post 3 days after it happened. When I called my mother crying and asking why I wasn't invited, she sighed deeply and said, "Serafina, you know how you get at family events. We just wanted one peaceful celebration." How I get? I had never caused drama at family events. I was quiet, well-behaved, perhaps too honest for their taste, but never disruptive. That phone call haunted me for weeks. What did they mean? What had I done to deserve this treatment? The truth came in the most unexpected way. Marcus was having IT issues at his company and asked me to help troubleshoot his email server remotely. While fixing the problem, I noticed he had multiple email aliases set up incorrectly, causing some messages to forward to unintended recipients. One of those recipients was my email address. That's how I received an email thread titled "Sarah Situation, Legal Update," dated 3 weeks earlier. The first message was from Delphine to Marcus. The lawyers confirmed it. As long as Sarah doesn't contest the will interpretation within 5 years of grandmother's death, the redistribution stands. It's been 4 years and 8 months. We're almost clear. Marcus's response made my blood run cold. Good. The beach house sale money is already invested in my new venture. Mother and father were right to agree to this arrangement. Sarah would have just wasted it anyway. My grandmother Beatrice Blackwood had died 5 years ago. I remembered the will reading vaguely. I was grieving and overwhelmed. The lawyer had explained that her estate was being divided among the grandchildren, but the specific amounts and assets were handled privately. I received a check for $15,000, which I assumed was my share. According to this email thread, I was wrong, dead wrong. The next message was from my father. Eleanor is having second thoughts about the beach house. She thinks Sarah should have known about it. Delphine's reply was swift and cold. We've been over this. Sarah was always grandmother's least favorite. She said so herself. Besides, look how Sarah turned out, living in that tiny apartment working a mediocre job. She would have sold the property immediately and blown the money. We're preserving grandmother's legacy by keeping it in responsible hands. The beach house. My grandmother had owned a stunning oceanfront property in Mendocino that I had loved since childhood. I spent entire summers there reading on the wraparound porch, collecting shells with grandmother, learning to paint watercolors in her art studio. It was where I felt most myself, most peaceful. I had asked about it during the will reading, and the lawyer said it had been sold to handle estate debts. They had lied. They had all lied. The email thread continued with logistical discussions about property management, rental income, and maintenance costs. Marcus was using it as a vacation rental through his property management company. They were earning substantial monthly income from my grandmother's house while I struggled to make rent. But the betrayal went deeper. The final email in the chain was from my mother, sent just 2 days before I discovered it. I saw Sarah at the grocery store yesterday. She looks so thin, so tired. Maybe we should invite her to Marcus's birthday party next month. Delphine's response was swift. Absolutely not. She'll just bring down the mood with her negativity. Besides, if she finds out about the beach house now, she could still cause legal problems. Let's wait until the 5-year mark passes, then we can slowly rebuild the relationship. Marcus agreed. Delphine's right. We've maintained the exclusion this long, 6 more months and we're legally safe. Then we can be generous and forgive her for being so distant from the family. I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop screen, reading and rereading those words. They hadn't excluded me because I was dramatic or difficult. They had systematically isolated me to prevent me from discovering their theft. Every missed holiday, every unanswered invitation, every dismissive comment about my sensitivity, it was all calculated to keep me away from family conversations where the truth might slip out. The inheritance I should have received wasn't just the beach house. According to the emails, grandmother had left me an equal share of her entire estate, including stocks, bonds, and her art collection. The total value was close to $800,000. Instead, I received $15,000 and was told to be grateful. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around my tiny apartment seeing everything differently. The secondhand furniture, the stack of bills on my kitchen counter, the rejection letters from better jobs that required financial stability I couldn't afford to maintain during career transitions. Meanwhile, my siblings had used my inheritance to fund their comfortable lives. But what hurt most wasn't the money. It was the systematic emotional abuse. They had convinced me that I was the problem, that I was too sensitive, too difficult to include. They had made me question my own perception of reality while they stole my future. As dawn broke over Portland, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to cry or beg for explanations. I was going to do something they would never expect from the family disappointment. I was going to take back what was mine, and I was going to make sure they never forgot the cost of underestimating me. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove straight to the law offices of Henderson Blake and Associates. I had researched them the night before. They specialized in estate law and had a reputation for taking on cases other firms wouldn't touch. The consultation fee was expensive, but I used my emergency credit card. This was definitely an emergency. Attorney Patricia Henderson was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. I spread the printed emails across her mahogany desk and told her everything. She read through each message twice, occasionally making notes in precise handwriting. "This is estate fraud," she said finally. "Deliberate concealment of inheritance, conspiracy among beneficiaries, and possible attorney misconduct, depending on how much the original estate lawyer knew." She leaned back in her chair. "The 5-year deadline they mentioned is real, but it's not as absolute as they think. Fraud can extend that timeline considerably." My heart pounded. What are my options? We can file a formal challenge to the estate distribution, demand a full accounting of all assets, and request immediate freeze orders on any properties or investments derived from your grandmother's estate. Patricia's smile was sharp. "But I suspect you want more than just your money back." She was right. I wanted them to face consequences for what they had done to me emotionally. The money was important, but the years of gaslighting, the systematic exclusion, the way they had made me question my own worth, that deserved a reckoning. "There's another approach," Patricia continued. "We gather evidence, build an airtight case, and then present them with a choice: full restitution plus damages, or we file criminal charges for estate fraud and make this very public." I chose the nuclear option. The investigation took 3 weeks. Patricia hired a forensic accountant who traced every dollar of my grandmother's estate. The beach house had been transferred to Marcus's Property Management LLC for $1. The stock portfolio had been quietly distributed among my siblings' investment accounts. Even grandmother's art collection had been divided with pieces hanging in each of their homes. The total value of my stolen inheritance, including 5 years of growth and rental income, was over $1.2 million. But Patricia found something else. In grandmother's personal papers, stored in a safety deposit box that hadn't been mentioned during the original will reading, we discovered a letter addressed to me. It was dated just 2 months before her death. My dearest Serafina. It began in her familiar handwriting. If you are reading this, it means something has gone wrong with my estate planning. You were always my kindred spirit, the one who understood beauty and art and the importance of preserving special places. The Mendocino house is yours along with half my estate. I've made this clear in my will, but I worry your siblings may try to interfere. You are stronger than they realize, my dear. Don't let them convince you otherwise. The letter was legal proof of grandmother's intentions and evidence that my family knew they were stealing from me. Patricia was confident we could win in court, but she suggested a different strategy first. Let's give them a chance to do the right thing, she said. Sometimes the fear of public exposure is more powerful than legal consequences. We arranged a family meeting under false pretenses. I told Marcus I had exciting news to share and asked if we could all gather at his house that Saturday. He seemed surprised, but pleased that I was reaching out. See, he told Delphine over the phone while I listened on extension. I always said she'd come around eventually. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest weather. Marcus's house was a stunning modern design overlooking the Columbia River, clearly financed by money that should have been partially mine. Delphine arrived with her husband and children. My parents came last, mother carrying a store-bought pie as if this were a normal family gathering. We sat in Marcus's living room making awkward small talk. I could see grandmother's paintings on the walls, 2 watercolors I remembered from her studio now matted and framed expensively. Mother commented on how nice it was to have me back in the family fold. Delphine asked about my job with feigned interest. Actually, I said, standing up and walking to my purse. My job situation is part of what I wanted to discuss. I pulled out a folder containing copies of all the evidence Patricia and I had gathered. But first, I think we need to talk about grandmother's will. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus's smile faltered. Delphine's face went pale. My father cleared his throat nervously. What about it? Mother asked, her voice carefully neutral. I opened the folder and began laying out documents on Marcus's expensive coffee table. Bank statements showing the property transfer. Investment records proving the redistribution of stocks. Rental income reports from the Mendocino house. Finally, I placed grandmother's letter in the center. I know what you did, I said quietly. All of it. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then Delphine laughed, but it sounded forced and brittle. Sarah, I think you're misunderstanding something. I'm understanding perfectly. I pulled out my phone and opened the email thread. Would you like me to read your messages out loud? The ones about keeping me excluded until the legal deadline passed? Or maybe the part where you called me grandmother's least favorite? Marcus stood up abruptly. How did you get those emails? You asked me to fix your server, remember? Turns out you're better at stealing inheritances than you are at IT security. I looked around the room at their shocked faces. 8 years. You excluded me from this family for 8 years to cover up your theft. My father finally spoke. Serafina, we can explain. No. I held up my hand. You can listen, because here's what's going to happen. You have 72 hours to transfer my full inheritance, plus 5 years of growth and rental income, plus damages for emotional distress. The total amount is $1.4 million. Delphine gasped. That's insane. We don't have that kind of money. You should have thought about that before you spent mine. I gathered up the documents. If you refuse or if you try to hide assets, my attorney will file criminal charges for estate fraud. This will become a matter of public record. Marcus, your business partners will love reading about how you built your company with stolen money. Delphine, I'm sure your country club friends will be fascinated by your family's criminal activities. I walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. Oh, and the Mendocino house, I'll be taking possession immediately. I hope you don't have any guests booked for next month. As I drove away, I could see them through the living room window, all talking at once, gesturing wildly. For the first time in 8 years, they were having a family meeting about me where I held all the power. The real reckoning was just beginning. The 72 hours passed in complete silence from my family. No calls, no texts, no desperate attempts at negotiation. Their radio silence told me everything I needed to know. They were consulting lawyers and looking for ways to minimize their losses while avoiding criminal charges. On the 4th day, Patricia called with an update. They've hired Cromwell and Associates. Expensive firm, but they're known for settling quickly when their clients are clearly in the wrong. I expect we'll hear something soon. She was right. That afternoon, Marcus called from his lawyer's office with me on speaker. His voice was strained, missing its usual confident tone. Sarah, we want to work this out as a family, but $1.4 million it's not realistic. We've made investments, there are tax implications. Then you should have thought about that before you stole from me, I interrupted. I'm not negotiating the amount. It's what I'm owed plus interest plus damages. Your financial planning problems aren't my concern. The lawyer, a man with a pompous voice who introduced himself as Richard Cromwell III, tried a different approach. Ms. Blackwood, while we acknowledge there may have been some miscommunication regarding the estate distribution, pursuing this matter legally would be costly for everyone involved. Perhaps we could discuss a more reasonable settlement. The only miscommunication, I replied, was my family lying to me for 5 years while they spent my inheritance, and I'm curious, Mr. Cromwell, about your firm's role in the original estate proceedings. Did you advise my family on how to exclude me from my rightful inheritance? Long pause. We had no involvement in the original estate. Interesting. That meant they'd handled the theft themselves, probably with a lawyer who was either incompetent or complicit. Patricia had already flagged this as a separate avenue of investigation. The call ended with no resolution, but I sensed panic in Marcus's voice. Good. They were finally understanding that their little sister had grown teeth. That evening I received an unexpected visitor. Emily Richardson had been my closest friend in college before I gradually lost touch with most people during the family exclusion years. She stood at my apartment door holding a bottle of wine and wearing a determined expression. I saw Marcus's wife at the gym today, she said without preamble. She looked like she'd been crying, and when I asked if everything was okay, she started babbling about family legal troubles and ungrateful siblings. Emily pushed past me into the apartment. Spill everything. I told her the whole story. Emily listened with growing outrage, occasionally interjecting with expletives that would make sailors blush. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You know what this reminds me of, she said finally. My divorce. The way David tried to hide assets and convince me I was being unreasonable for wanting my fair share. Emily had gone through a brutal divorce 2 years earlier with a husband who'd attempted to conceal their joint assets. I learned a lot about financial investigations during that process. Want some help? The offer was tempting, but I hesitated. Emily, I don't want to drag you into family drama. Stop. She held up her hand. They systematically isolated you from everyone who cared about you. I should have tried harder to stay in touch, should have questioned why you seemed to withdraw from everyone. Let me help fix this. Emily's assistance proved invaluable. As a marketing director for a large nonprofit, she understood public relations and social media in ways I never could. More importantly, she had connections throughout our college network, many of whom remembered me fondly and were shocked to learn about my family situation. Public opinion matters, she explained as we sat in a coffee shop planning strategy. Even if this doesn't go to trial, your family cares about their reputation. Marcus's business depends on trust and reliability. Delphine's husband is a doctor in a small community. Your parents are active in their church and social circles. The threat of exposure might be more effective than legal action alone. She helped me create a detailed timeline of the exclusion, complete with screenshots of social media posts from family events I wasn't invited to, documentation of my repeated attempts to maintain relationships, and evidence of the systematic gaslighting I'd experienced. But our most powerful ally came from an unexpected source: Dr. James Morrison. Delphine's husband called me directly on a Friday evening. "Serafina, this is James. I think we need to talk." I was so surprised I nearly dropped the phone. James had always been polite but distant during family gatherings, focusing on his medical practice and their children. I couldn't imagine why he was calling me directly. "Delphine doesn't know I'm calling," he continued, "but I can't stay silent about this anymore. What they did to you was wrong, completely morally wrong." We met at a small restaurant outside his usual area, somewhere he was unlikely to be recognized. James looked exhausted, older than his 38 years. He ordered coffee with shaking hands. "I found out about the inheritance theft 3 years ago," he began. "I was reviewing our tax documents and noticed some unusual asset transfers. When I asked Delphine about them, she broke down and told me everything." He paused, staring into his coffee. "I told her then that we needed to contact you to make things right. She convinced me to wait, said they would handle it eventually." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because eventually never came. And because yesterday I overheard Delphine on the phone with your mother planning to claim you're having some kind of mental health crisis. They want to argue that your accusations are delusional, that you're making up persecution fantasies." James's jaw tightened. "I'm a doctor. I took an oath to do no harm. I can't watch them destroy you emotionally on top of stealing from you financially." This information was a game changer. Patricia confirmed that attempting to discredit a victim's mental health was a common defense strategy in family financial fraud cases, but it rarely worked when the victim had solid evidence and credible witnesses. Dr. Morrison's testimony about when he learned of the theft and his wife's refusal to make restitution could be powerful, Patricia explained. "It shows consciousness of guilt and ongoing conspiracy." James provided more than testimony. He had secretly photographed documents in their home safe that detailed the asset transfers, including communications with financial advisors about how to minimize paper trails. Most importantly, he had recordings of recent phone conversations where Delphine and my mother discussed strategies for discrediting me. "I'm not proud of recording my wife," he said when he delivered the evidence. "But I couldn't let them victimize you again. My children deserve to learn that actions have consequences, even when the person acting badly is their mother." With James's evidence, Emily's public relations strategy, and Patricia's legal expertise, we had built a comprehensive case that extended far beyond simple estate fraud. We could now prove ongoing conspiracy, witness intimidation attempts, and a pattern of emotional abuse designed to cover up financial crimes. The final piece of our alliance came from an unexpected source: social media investigation that Emily's college friends had undertaken voluntarily. They'd created a private group to document instances of my family's exclusion, comparing my absence from family photos over the years, with public posts about their wealth and success. The pattern was undeniable and heartbreaking. Marcus's expensive vacations funded by grandmother's stocks. Delphine's home renovations paid for with my inheritance. My parents' comfortable retirement subsidized by money that should have supported my own financial security. All of it documented in their own social media posts, time-stamped and saved. "They've created their own evidence trail," Emily observed as we reviewed the documentation. "Every luxury purchase, every family celebration, I was excluded from every public display of wealth. It's all connected to money they stole from me." We were ready for war, but James suggested one final attempt at private resolution. "Let me try talking to them first," he said. "Now that I have copies of all the evidence, they can't claim ignorance or misunderstanding. Maybe family pressure will succeed where legal pressure hasn't." It was a reasonable request, but I was skeptical. My family had shown no capacity for genuine remorse or accountability so far. Still, James deserved the chance to try saving his marriage and protecting his children from the public scandal that was coming if we proceeded with full legal action. What none of us anticipated was that James's intervention would trigger an even deeper betrayal, one that would test everything I thought I knew about trust and alliance. James's intervention with my family happened on a Tuesday evening. He called me Wednesday morning with news that seemed too good to be true. "They've agreed to everything," he said, excitement clear in his voice. "Full restitution plus the emotional damages you requested." Delphine was crying, your mother kept apologizing, even Marcus admitted they'd made terrible mistakes. They want to meet this weekend to sign the settlement papers and transfer the properties back to you. I should have been thrilled, but something felt wrong. After 5 years of systematic deception and 2 weeks of aggressive legal resistance, my family's sudden complete capitulation seemed impossible. Emily shared my skepticism when I called her. "People don't just flip from denial to full confession overnight," she said. "Especially not people who've been this calculating for this long. Be careful, Sarah." Patricia was even more direct. "This smells like a trap. No competent lawyer would advise clients to admit complete fault and agree to maximum damages without getting something significant in return." Despite our concerns, we decided to proceed with the weekend meeting. Patricia would attend as my representation, and we'd insist on immediate property transfers rather than promises of future payment. If they were genuinely ready to make things right, they'd agree to our conditions. Saturday morning, I arrived at my parents' house with Patricia and Emily. The familiar colonial where I'd grown up looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing, now that I understood the people inside weren't the moral authorities I'd once believed them to be. James met us at the door, but something in his demeanor had changed. Gone was the guilty, apologetic man who'd provided evidence against his own wife. Instead, he seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact as he led us to the living room. My family was gathered exactly as they'd been 2 weeks earlier, but the dynamic felt different. They looked more confident, less panicked. Marcus actually smiled when he saw me, which immediately raised every alarm bell in my head. "Serafina," my mother said warmly, "we're so glad you came. We have a lot to apologize for." The conversation that followed was surreal. Each family member took turns offering seemingly heartfelt apologies. They acknowledged the inheritance theft, admitted to the systematic exclusion, and expressed genuine-sounding remorse for the emotional damage they'd caused. Delphine even cried while describing how guilty she'd felt about taking grandmother's house. But their body language didn't match their words. They kept glancing at James, who sat rigidly beside his wife, staring at his hands. When Patricia began reviewing the settlement documents they'd prepared, I noticed Marcus checking his phone repeatedly. "This all looks very comprehensive," Patricia said carefully, "but I'd like to review the property transfer documents before my client signs anything." "Of course," my father replied. "James has all the paperwork in his car. Why don't you two go get it while we continue our family conversation?" James stood immediately, too quickly, like he'd been waiting for this cue. As he and Patricia left for his car, I felt a growing sense of unease. Emily must have sensed it too, because she moved closer to me on the couch. "So," Marcus said once they were gone, "we should probably talk about your little investigation." The warmth disappeared from his voice, like a switch had been flipped. Suddenly I was facing the cold, calculating people I'd been dealing with for 2 weeks, not the remorseful family members who'd been performing for the last hour. "What investigation?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Delphine pulled out her phone and began reading. "Emily Richardson, Marketing Director at Pacific Northwest Children's Foundation. Current address, employer, contact information, social media profiles dating back to college." She looked up at me with a smile that made my blood run cold. "Did you really think we wouldn't investigate your little support network?" My mother joined in her voice, taking on the same cruel edge I remembered from childhood when I'd disappointed her. "Dr. Sarah Martinez, your college roommate, now a pediatrician in Seattle. Thomas Chen, your friend from freshman year statistics class, currently a software engineer at Microsoft. Jennifer Walsh, your lab partner in organic chemistry, working as a pharmaceutical researcher in San Francisco. They had been busy. While I'd been building alliances and gathering evidence, they'd been conducting their own investigation into everyone who'd helped me. The list continued. Emily's supervisor at work, my former colleagues who'd provided character references, even Patricia's legal assistant who'd helped with research. Impressive network, Marcus said. Too bad most of them have careers that depend on maintaining spotless reputations. The threat was unmistakable, but I still didn't understand how they planned to use this information. Then James returned to the house alone without Patricia, and I realized I'd walked into something much worse than I'd imagined. "Where's my lawyer?" I demanded. "Patricia Henderson is currently being detained by police," my father said calmly, "on charges of harassment and stalking, filed by a very credible witness who claims she's been receiving threatening phone calls and unwanted contact from Ms. Henderson's office." The room spun. "That's impossible. Patricia never—" "Of course she didn't," James interrupted, speaking for the first time since returning. "Just like you never really found those emails by accident. Just like the inheritance documents weren't actually falsified." His voice was bitter self-loathing, but directed at me rather than my family. "Did you honestly think your sob story about financial fraud would convince me to betray my wife and destroy my children's future?" Understanding hit me like a physical blow. James had never been my ally. Everything, the secret meetings, the recorded conversations, the evidence he'd provided, it had all been part of an elaborate setup designed to entrap me and my legal team. "The recordings were fake," I whispered. "Expertly crafted," Delphine confirmed. "James has a friend who works in audio production for film studios. Amazing what technology can do these days." The financial documents he showed me. "Completely fabricated," Marcus said. "Though I have to admit, they looked authentic enough to fool your lawyer." "We were particularly proud of the forged bank statements." Emily stood up abruptly. "This is insane. You can't just frame people for crimes they didn't commit." "Watch us," my mother replied sweetly. "Because here's what's going to happen. Serafina is going to sign a document admitting that her accusations were false, that she fabricated evidence in an attempt to extort money from her family, and that she's seeking psychological help for her delusional behavior. And if I refuse—" Marcus held up his phone showing a text message screen. "Then Patricia Henderson's arrest becomes the first domino. Emily Richardson gets fired when her employer receives evidence that she's been using company resources to harass a prominent local family. Your college friends start facing professional consequences for participating in a conspiracy to commit fraud." The scope of their planning was breathtaking and terrifying. They hadn't just been defending themselves against my accusations, they'd been setting up a counterattack that would destroy everyone who tried to help me. "You have 10 minutes to decide," Delphine said, checking her expensive watch. "Sign the confession and retraction and we'll make Patricia's charges disappear. Refuse and we destroy everyone who believed in you." As I sat in my childhood living room surrounded by family members who'd spent months orchestrating my complete destruction, I realized I'd underestimated them as badly as they'd once underestimated me. But there was one thing they didn't know about their supposedly perfect plan. I hadn't come here unprepared either. 10 minutes, I repeated, looking around the room at their confident faces. "That's interesting timing considering the FBI should be arriving in about 8. Marcus laughed. "The FBI, really, Sarah? You're going to pretend federal agents are coming to rescue you?" "Not pretend," I said, pulling out my phone and checking the time. "Special Agent Rebecca Torres from the Economic Crime Unit should be pulling into the driveway right about now." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the living room window, we could all see 2 black SUVs turning into the circular driveway. Car doors slammed and I counted 6 people in dark suits walking toward the house. "That's impossible," Delphine whispered. "We checked everything. We covered every angle." "You covered the angles you knew about," I replied. "But you made one critical mistake. You assumed James was the only person in this room recording conversations." I pulled a small device from my purse. a high-end digital recorder that Emily had insisted I carry to every family meeting. For the last hour, it had been documenting their detailed confession to fabricating evidence, filing false police reports, and conspiring to destroy innocent people's careers. Everything you just said about framing Patricia, creating fake documents, and threatening my friends, it's all on here. But more importantly, it's been live streaming to a secure server maintained by someone you didn't investigate. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Agent Torres showing her badge to a stunned-looking neighbor who'd come outside to see what was happening. Emily's brother David. I continued as my father reluctantly went to answer the door. Is a cybersecurity specialist for the Department of Justice. He's been monitoring this entire situation since Emily told him about the inheritance fraud. When we realized you might retaliate against people who helped me, David reached out to his colleagues in economic crimes. Agent Torres entered the living room like a force of nature, a tall, no-nonsense woman in her 40s who immediately commanded the space. Behind her came three other agents and two people I didn't recognize, but who carried themselves with obvious authority. Ms. Blackwood, Agent Torres said, nodding to me. Thank you for your cooperation with this investigation. Ladies and gentlemen, she addressed my family. I'm Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI Economic Crime Unit. We have warrants for the arrest of Marcus Blackwood, Delphine Morrison, Eleanor Blackwood, and Richard Blackwood on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The room erupted. My mother started crying. Marcus began demanding to see the warrants. Delphine looked around frantically as if searching for an escape route. James, meanwhile, had gone completely white. Agent Torres, he said shakily, I think there's been some misunderstanding. I'm Dr. James Morrison. I'm not involved in whatever this is about. Actually, Dr. Morrison, Agent Torres replied, you're facing additional charges for filing false police reports, evidence tampering, and practicing medicine while participating in ongoing criminal activities. The medical board will be very interested in your extracurricular activities. One of the other agents began reading them their rights, while another started photographing the living room and collecting potential evidence. But Agent Torres focused on me. Ms. Blackwood, we've been investigating your family's financial activities for 6 months, well before you contacted your lawyer about the inheritance fraud. This case started when David Richardson flagged unusual interstate money transfers that triggered our automated monitoring systems. 6 months. The FBI had been watching my family since before I even knew about the theft. David's cybersecurity work had identified their activities as suspicious and initiated a federal investigation that had been running parallel to my own efforts. Your personal case gave us the final pieces we needed, Agent Torres continued. The recordings you've been making combined with our financial surveillance and the fabricated evidence your family created to entrap your legal team provided everything necessary for prosecution. She turned to address my family, who were now being handcuffed by other agents. The inheritance fraud was just the beginning. We've documented 5 years of systematic money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Marcus, your property management company has been laundering money for criminal organizations while hiding behind your stolen inheritance investments. Delphine, your husband's medical practice has been billing insurance companies for procedures that never happened, with profits funneled through accounts established with your grandmother's stolen assets. The scope of their criminal activities was staggering. What I'd thought was simple inheritance theft was actually part of a much larger pattern of financial crimes that had attracted federal attention. But what about Patricia? I asked. They said she was arrested. Agent Torres smiled grimly. Ms. Henderson was never arrested. That was part of their attempt to isolate you and force a confession. We've been coordinating with her throughout this investigation. As if summoned, Patricia appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 more FBI agents. She looked completely unruffled, like being involved in federal investigations was just another Tuesday for her. Sorry for the deception, Serafina, she said, but we needed your family to believe their plan was working. Your genuine reactions were crucial for getting them to confess on record. The betrayal I'd felt just minutes ago evaporated, replaced by a mixture of relief and amazement. Patricia had never been in danger. Emily's brother had been protecting everyone from the beginning. Even James's betrayal had served a purpose. It had prompted my family to reveal the full extent of their criminal activities while they thought they were safe. The Mendocino house will be returned to you immediately, Agent Torres explained as my family was led out of the house in handcuffs. Your full inheritance plus damages will be recovered through asset forfeiture. But more importantly, the evidence we've gathered will ensure they face significant federal prison time. As the FBI vehicles pulled away with my family inside, I stood in the empty living room of my childhood home, trying to process everything that had happened. Emily arrived just as the last car disappeared down the street. David sends his apologies for not being able to tell you about the federal investigation, she said, wrapping me in a fierce hug. But he wanted you to know that your courage in pursuing this case helped expose crimes that went far beyond inheritance fraud. They've been using your grandmother's house as a hub for money laundering operations that span multiple states. Patricia joined us carrying a briefcase full of legal documents. There's one more thing, she said. The federal investigation uncovered something else about your grandmother's estate. She didn't just leave you half her assets, she left you everything. The will your family presented was completely fabricated. They forged documents and bribed the original estate attorney to hide the truth. Everything. My grandmother had left me her entire estate, trusting that I would honor her memory and preserve what mattered to her. My family hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they'd stolen everything she'd worked for during her lifetime. But now, finally, justice wasn't just served. It was delivered with federal prison sentences and asset forfeiture that would ensure they spent years paying for their crimes. The girl they'd tried to convince was too weak, too sensitive, too naive to fight back, had just brought down a multi-state criminal enterprise. 3 months later, I stood on the wraparound porch of my grandmother's Mendocino house, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and crimson. The property looked exactly as I remembered from childhood summers, but everything else had changed completely. Marcus received 8 years in federal prison for money laundering and wire fraud. His property management company was liquidated with all assets seized to pay restitution to victims of his various schemes. Delphine got 6 years for conspiracy and tax evasion, while James lost his medical license permanently and received 4 years for insurance fraud and evidence tampering. My parents, who cooperated with prosecutors once they realized the scope of federal evidence against them, each received 2 years in minimum security facilities. The inheritance recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. Beyond grandmother's original estate, the federal asset forfeiture included 5 years of criminal profits that Marcus and Delphine had generated using her stolen money. The final amount transferred to my accounts was over $2.8 million. But the real victory wasn't financial, it was emotional and psychological. For 8 years, my family had convinced me that I was the problem. Too sensitive, too difficult, too dramatic to include in their perfect lives. The federal investigation revealed that I hadn't been excluded because of personality flaws. I'd been systematically isolated because my natural empathy and emotional intelligence made me the family member most likely to recognize their criminal behavior. You were their greatest threat, Agent Torres explained during our final debriefing. People like your siblings prey on family loyalty and emotional manipulation. Your genuine caring nature and your ability to see through their facades made you dangerous to their operations. The house had been completely restored using funds seized from Marcus's money laundering accounts. I'd converted grandmother's art studio back to its original purpose and spent mornings painting watercolors just as she'd taught me 20 years earlier. The rental income from the property had been dirty money, but transformed into something clean. It now funded a scholarship program for first-generation college students studying financial literacy. Emily moved to Mendocino, permanently accepting a remote position with her nonprofit and becoming the closest thing to family I'd ever experienced. David visited regularly, bringing his wife and children for weekend getaways that filled the house with the kind of laughter and warmth it had known during grandmother's time. Patricia had become more than my lawyer. She'd become a mentor and friend who helped me establish a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of family financial fraud. We discovered that inheritance theft by relatives was far more common than anyone realized, but most victims lacked the resources or emotional support to fight back effectively. The foundation, which I named the Beatrice Blackwood Center for Family Justice, provided legal aid counseling and financial assistance to people whose families had stolen from them. In our first 6 months, we helped 43 people recover over $12 million in stolen inheritances and provided support services to dozens more who couldn't pursue legal remedies. But perhaps the most meaningful change was personal. The scared, isolated woman who'd lived in a cramped Portland apartment convinced she was somehow fundamentally flawed had been replaced by someone who understood her worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. I learned that chosen family, people who earn their place in your life through loyalty, honesty, and genuine care, is infinitely more valuable than biological family held together by obligation and manipulation. Emily, David, Patricia, and even Agent Torres, who stayed in touch long after the case closed, had shown me what healthy relationships actually looked like. The most surprising development came 6 months after the trials ended. I received a letter from James, written from federal prison, that began with a genuine apology and ended with information that changed everything I thought I knew about my childhood. Your grandmother knew, he wrote. She suspected Marcus and Delphine were stealing from her while she was alive but couldn't prove it. That's why she changed her will to leave everything to you. She trusted you to seek justice if something happened to her original estate plans. She even hid additional evidence in the house, though I don't know where. The evidence was in the last place I thought to look, inside the frame of a painting in her bedroom that I'd always assumed was just decorative. Behind the watercolor of our family's old farmhouse, I found documents proving that grandmother had been documenting suspicious financial activities for 2 years before her death. She'd known about the theft and had been building a case against my siblings, planning to confront them before her unexpected heart attack changed everything. The final document was another letter addressed to me. Dearest Serafina, if you've found this, it means my suspicions about your siblings were correct. You are stronger and more capable than they will ever understand. Don't let them convince you otherwise. The truth has a way of surfacing, and justice has a way of finding those who pursue it with courage and integrity. I love you, and I believe in you completely. Standing on that porch holding grandmother's final message, I realized that the 8 years of exclusion and emotional abuse hadn't broken me. They'd prepared me. Every moment of doubt, every instance of gaslighting, every time I'd been made to feel small and unworthy, had actually been building the resilience and determination I'd need to fight back when the time came. My family had tried to steal my inheritance, my relationships, my sense of self-worth, and my future. Instead, their crimes had led to federal prosecution, complete financial restitution, and the discovery of my own strength and capacity for building meaningful connections with people who actually deserved my trust. The justice wasn't just legal, it was cosmic. They'd spent years convincing me I was weak, only to discover I was strong enough to bring down their entire criminal empire. They'd isolated me from family, only to watch me build a chosen family that was healthier and more loving than anything we'd ever shared. They'd stolen my financial security, only to see their theft exposed and punished, while my grandmother's true wishes were finally honored. As I finished watching the sunset from my grandmother's porch, I thought about the girl who'd received that first email chain 8 months ago. She'd been so scared, so uncertain about whether she deserved better treatment from the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. Now I knew the truth: we all deserve better than abuse disguised as family loyalty. We all deserve people who celebrate our successes instead of sabotaging them. And we all have the power to seek justice, even when the people hurting us are the ones we're supposed to trust most. Have you ever had family members who made you question your own worth and perception of reality? Did you discover that the people excluding you were actually afraid of what you might uncover if you got too close to their secrets? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences help other viewers realize they're not alone in facing family betrayal. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find it. Subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up to family manipulation and finding justice when the system seems stacked against you. And share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they're stronger than the people trying to tear them down. Thank you for listening to my family revenge story and for supporting others who are fighting similar battles. Remember that chosen family built on mutual respect and genuine care will always be stronger than biological family held together by fear and obligation. Until next time, keep seeking truth and never let anyone convince you that you're asking for too much when all you want is basic honesty and respect.